Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Setting Your HMIS Implementation Up for Success, Why Your HMIS Admin Makes All the Difference. We are excited to hear from Josh Gray, Senior HMIS Coordinator from Georgia Department of Community Affairs, and John McGee, HMIS System Administrator for Ecovia Solutions. Just a reminder that your microphones will be muted throughout the presentation. Please submit any questions in the Q&A panel or through chat, and we will address as many as we can during the last part of the webinar. With that, I will go ahead and turn the time over to Josh and John to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Irene. Just wanted to quickly go over the agenda. Today we're going to be talking about the Georgia Department of Community Affairs and some of the challenges that we've faced here in Georgia, as well as some of the tools and processes we use to address those challenges. And hopefully those are some real life scenarios, situations that you can relate to and tools that you can take back to your community. Our plan is to talk for about 45 minutes and then have about 15 minutes at the end to address your questions. And I am Joshua Gray, the Senior HMIS Coordinator with the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. We are the HMIS lead for the state of Georgia, which consists of 9 COCs. 8 of those are on our implementation. Prior to that, I started doing this job back in August of 2017. Prior to that, I was with the Atlanta COC as a COC admin. And then before that, I spent the 10 years previous to that in direct care, working with youth homeless and adult homeless. So I've kind of seen this HMIS thing from all aspects, and I'm excited to share with you today.
And I'm John McGee. I work for Ecovia Solutions as a HMIS System Administrator. My time is dedicated just to the Georgia implementation, and I've been in this position for a little over 2 years now. Previous to that, I was a local HMIS admin for Columbus, Georgia for around 6 years. So I've kind of been on both sides of the fence, so to say, as far as being a local admin for several years and now working alongside a statewide implementation.
So who are we down here in Georgia? Well, we're the largest state east of the Mississippi River. We have 159 total counties. That's the second most number of counties behind Texas. Geographically, we consist of urban, suburban, super rural, and then this little place that maybe you've heard of, Atlanta, that's not quite like the rest. We have 9 total COCs. And if we look at our last year, we had over 1,500 end users that accessed our system. 677 of those were new user accounts that were created. We've seen over 100,000 enrollments in that year. And we can see that we had over 200 active agencies and over 850 active projects. Our database on Client Track is 2 years old, and in that time we've trained over 2,400 end users. Here's a little map of the state of Georgia. So I mentioned there's 159 counties, and you can see the COCs are color-coded here. The only COC that's not on our implementation is Columbus. It's that purplish one on the left side of your screen. But we do have a few ESG projects that are funded by DCA in Columbus, so those projects are on our implementation. If you look at the non-shaded counties, those are white. That's our balance of state, and it covers 152 counties throughout the state. So you can see there's going to be some unique challenges that they face compared to our other COCs. So what are those critical events and challenges that we face down here in Georgia? Well, we were on a homegrown local HMIS system since the beginning of time. And during the rigorous requirements for HUD to maintain compliance, that system decided they were getting out of the HMIS business. So we had a very short window between choosing our new system vendor, Ecovia Solutions, and Client Track. So we chose them, and then we had a very short window of less than 4 months between that choice, that decision, and going live. So there's not a lot of time really to prepare for that journey. In preparation for that, we really spent some time trying to decide what data needed to come over, and because we had so much data, we did decide to do a migration. Initially, we just brought over HMIS data, and in that process, we talked with lots of COCs, lots of agencies trying to determine what data was vital. And from that, we decided that there was some additional non-HMIS data that we needed to bring over, and that was an additional migration at a later date. And then we also learned that even though we asked all these questions, many of our agencies either didn't respond or didn't respond accurately, and we realized that there was some additional HMIS data that they needed and wanted, so then we had to do an additional migration after that. Along with those changes and challenges, our governance structure was changing. So we were going from a system where each local COC had their own implementation, if you will, and we were going to a shared implementation across the entire state, moving from a model of consent to enter data to a model of consent to share data. At the same time, all of our policies were being rewritten and changed, not all because of our move to a new system, but it just seemed like a good time to change everything. And in addition to all of that, there was this lack of institutional historical knowledge of the changing data that we were bringing over the course of time, because the stakeholders and the key leaders that requested data changes or requested custom developments were no longer around, and we no longer had access to get that historical knowledge. Additionally, what we found is after we brought over data, that there were many test projects and test data in our production environment or workaround clients. These weren't really discovered until we started supporting our COCs with their compliance reporting. So as APR started to get submitted, as HUD data quality reports started to be run, we got questions of, well, why is Mickey Mouse in my project? Why is Daffy Duck missing a social security number? And it quickly became apparent that we had lots of fake, non-real clients. In addition, as we were starting to do inventory and trying to be compliant there, we found projects or agencies that we'd never heard of, we couldn't find, and realized that they were workaround agencies that were left over from the old system. So we had to do a lot of cleanup. Our previous tech support structure had to change because each COC was kind of doing their own thing. Any agency could go directly to the old vendor and have a customization built. And no one knew why, no one knew where, no one knew how, but there were these random things that existed in our old data. So as the HMIS lead, we didn't fully know what data everyone was collecting. We discovered projects that were, set up as an emergency shelter, but funded by a transitional housing grant. It didn't really make sense. And there was a lot of things there that were not in alignment. At the same time, our COCs were all trying to implement or design their own coordinated entry processes. And with a shared system, you really had to make sure that any development for one COC didn't affect another COC at the same time. So lots of challenges that we were addressing.
So Josh has kind of talked about some of the challenges that we faced over the past couple of years, and as you saw, it was actually quite a few different things that we had to kind of face and go through. But we want to start talking about some of the responses to those challenges. And so for one, we realized that as Georgia, we really needed to look at a new structure for the way we were supporting HMIS. And what that looked like is we created a new role in Georgia called COC admins. And that was where we had each COC establish a local HMIS admin. So we had 8 COCs, as he mentioned, as part of this implementation. So each of them would need to establish 2 people. So that way we'd have a primary COC admin and a backup, because you never know when someone's going to go on vacation or be out sick or staff turnover. So that way there was some redundancy there. And this was added to the existing structure we already had in place, which was a structure of system admins, HMIS lead, HMIS steering committee. And so I kind of wanted to break those responsibilities down for you all. And I'm going to kind of start from the top and go down. So starting from the top, we have our HMIS steering committee. So they're kind of looking at the big picture stuff of HMIS. They're going to provide the oversight, direction for the HMIS lead. Then under them, we have the HMIS lead. So they're going to be providing the direction for HMIS, day-to-day operations, so more specific prioritizing tasks and our backlog, which we'll get into in a little bit, for system admins. And then under that, we have a system admins, and this is one of the roles that I play. And so one of kind of my main responsibilities is going to be support that new role that we created of COC admins. I'm supporting them, and then also just supporting HMIS in general. So that means I'm going to be responsible for knowing the system configuration overall. So as far as anytime there's like a form modification or report build out, anything like that, that's going to be on system admins because we have access to modify the system as a whole. I'm also going to be training and supporting those COC admins. And so kind of the idea there is that I train and support them. They're able to then go and support their local users for their COC. And then, however, I do, and as system admins, we do provide the initial training for users in Georgia. And so that is by way of video series that we created, which we'll kind of get to show you guys in a little bit. But we provide that initial training and have a resource of training for users. But on an ongoing basis, those COC admins are kind of more working alongside the users for training purposes. And then I'm also providing just guidance and advice on HMIS. So because system admins are kind of looking at the system as a whole, not just for an individual COC, we kind of have a good way of getting a bird's eye view of it and saying, okay, what is maybe some suggestions we would have? What are some things we could implement that would benefit, the state as a whole or all of the individual COCs at the same time? And then I'm also going to be providing support for community reporting. So that could be compliance reporting. And if it's compliance reporting, that would kind of look like maybe some training materials I'm putting together for a new compliance report that's going to be rolled out in HMIS. Or maybe there's a non-compliant or non-HMIS report that would just be good to have for either the state or particular COCs, or even maybe some agencies, something like that. Then I could go ahead and work on creating a report like that. And I kind of take care of almost everything between the COC admin and the vendor. And I think for Georgia specifically, and for me in my role as working for Covia, I kind of have a unique position in that I am employed by the vendor, but then I'm, 100% of my time is dedicated to this Georgia implementation. So I've kind of got one foot in Covia and then 1 foot in Georgia. And so that's kind of been nice to kind of bridge those two gaps there. And then that leads us to our COC admins.
So as we look at our COC admins, they're responsible for knowing the projects and the end users of their COC. John and I could never know the intimate details of the 2,400 end users that have been trained across the state. We can't know their strengths and their needs and opportunities for growth. So that's why we have these COC admins. They ensure that the users get appropriate and ongoing adequate training. They make sure that, users have access to the system by, maintaining their passwords and their accounts, kind of troubleshooting any access issues they might have. If they've forgotten their password, they can do password resets. If there's some URL problems, they can troubleshoot those. The admins are responsible for making sure that projects are set up correctly in the system and kind of maintaining a knowledge base of what projects are in their COC and what the needs of those projects are. They're there to support those issues for end users on basic navigation, basic data entry, editing, or any kind of reporting issues. And I think the important thing here is that we didn't just throw all of those responsibilities on our admins at once. We stair-stepped those responsibilities. So initially, our admins were only kind of managing password resets or basic navigation. Then as we continue to train them and build confidence and expand their knowledge base, then they started taking on additional issues around like basic data entry, editing or troubleshooting reports, helping correct data quality issues. Initially, all of our admins actually didn't even have access to edit data in the system. They only had access to view it. So then they would view it and educate their end user on how to edit it. We quickly realized that for the size of our COCs and our end users' capabilities, it would be helpful if admins could actually do some of that editing themselves and kind of walk through it as they're editing it on how to train an end user fixing it. And I think the other big important thing here that we've made sure to implement is that our COC admins have this lack of destructive power. So they can edit data in the system. They can make some changes and modifications to like that level, but there's nothing that they can do that's going to break the system. There's nothing they can do that's going to make the system non-compliant with HUD requirements, and that's very important. So one of the unique aspects of this structure is that really the COCs in our structure have that local knowledge and control and kind of guide the direction we go, but we as the HMIS lead and admin team ensure compliant data collection. So we really work in tandem together. Anytime that enhancement request comes through or a form modification or some user functionality requests come in, the COC kind of like drives, this is what we want. But then us as the system admin team and HMIS lead, we do the analysis and the planning for that. If there's any new data that they want to collect that's not HUD required, we analyze it, we plan it, and then we actually implement the way it will be built and coordinate how it will be implemented and trained upon. So in our structure, the admins know the system, but the COCs are driving that direction. And a good example of this is that COC admins kind of vet and control who has access. So whenever we've got new organizations that want on board, our COC admins vet them first. So they make sure that, hey, this is an actual homeless serving agency. They're serving homeless people. They're actually working in our community. They're going to come on the system and do actual data collection, data entry. And they're not just trying to hop on the system to kind of try to mine some data maybe. So the admins do all of that kind of vetting process and say, yes, this is an agency that operates in our COC. They're doing work in our community. We would all be benefiting from having them on the HMIS system. Then they kind of roll all that to us as the HMIS lead. And then we check to make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed on all the paperwork. We set up those organizations and then roll out the initial user training and then ongoing maintenance of those users and projects then rolls back to the COC admins. So we really have to make sure that we're working together.
And so now we're going to kind of get into how admins can make all the difference. And so I want to start with documentation and why that's important. And that is important because you'll never need to remember what you did or why you did it for at least 2 months after you do it. And that might be 2 weeks after you did it. That might be 2 years after you did it. But in my experience, things that you've set up in HMIS, modifications you've made, at some point you're going to need to go back to that and know why do we make that change. In the case management world, there is the phrase, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. Well, we kind of like to say in regards to HMIS modifications that if you didn't write it down, it did happen, we just don't know why. So again, it's really important that we are documenting those changes. So part of that's going to look like technical notes. So as we are making form modifications or changing a report or anything like that, I'm going to go in and add technical notes. Now in our HMIS and Client Track, we can do that actually on the form itself. There's kind of a area in the back end where when we make a change, we can go leave a note there. So we are always sure to do that. If you don't have that ability, you could also just have an Excel spreadsheet or something like that and keep a list of changes you made to the system. At the very least, I do recommend keeping an Excel spreadsheet of kind of a master list of all of the different forms or reports or changes that you've made in the system. So I keep something like that for Georgia, for instance, where I have a list of all the forms we have that have been customized or created, and then just kind of a brief summary of the purpose of those. And then as far as the more technical notes, I will record those on the individual form or reports itself. And I'm reminded of something my old boss used to always tell me, and she would say, John, if you get hit by a bus tomorrow, are we going to be okay with HMIS? And that might be a morbid way of looking at it, but I think it's very true, right? Like we don't know what the future holds. We don't know, if staff turnover, when that's going to happen and things like that. So if we're documenting things, then it just makes life so much easier on everybody. And for issues that end users have, we have them all submit an issue ticket. So everything's recorded in that way, as well as ticket responses. So as far as once a user submits an issue ticket, and we have a local admin, or maybe us as a system admin, we're addressing that ticket, we're going to leave notes on that issue ticket. Now, that being said, we realize there are sometimes, users might benefit from just a phone call or maybe discussing something over email, and that's actually totally fine. We're cool with that. What we do there is that we just ask our admins that, one, the end user does initially submit that ticket to kind of kick things off, and then if there's a phone call to actually resolve it, great. Then the admin would just go in and leave a response and say, okay, like we had a phone call, we were able to work through that problem. This is how we corrected it. And what this has done is it's created this really great archive we have of all of the issues that we've ever had in Georgia in HMIS, but more importantly, all the solutions to those problems. We have those archived as well. So if we have an admin start tomorrow and they get an issue ticket assigned to them, they can actually go in and say, oh, you know what, 3 months ago there was another user that brought this up and this is how we fixed it. So that's been a really important part of us managing issues within Georgia. And you don't want to just document things that you have done in the system, but also potential future projects and tasks. And that kind of gets us over to the idea of a backlog. And so in Georgia, we create a backlog item for any potential future projects or tasks we'd like to complete. And we actually record those as an issue ticket, but we have a separate area within HMIS where we can do that outside of the standard user issue tickets. But we create a backlog item for each of those things, and it could be something we want to do in 2 years. It could be something we want to do in a week from now in the system. Regardless, we go ahead and put it in. It could be something that maybe we think is a good idea and we end up not doing it, but we go ahead and put it in the backlog. And that has really helped us a lot. And as we do that, we are attaching requirements or any type of documentation we have alongside of that backlog item. We'll go ahead and attach in there. And there is kind of an art, I think, to creating what we would call a good backlog item. So you want these to be, or at least for Georgia, what we found is beneficial is having these to be fairly specific tasks. So for instance, a good backlog item might be add VI-SPDAT to intake workflow for heads of household. So that's pretty specific, right? It's telling us what we want to do with which clients and then where in the system. And that's something that, eventually we can say, okay, we did this or we didn't do it, and we can go ahead and mark this backlog item as such. A bad backlog item would be improve the intake workflow. Well, that doesn't tell us a lot, right? There could actually be several things we want to do with the intake workflow. And so there could be several backlog items within that. And so again, you want to be fairly specific when creating backlog items. We found that to be really helpful. And then we have a weekly call where we review the progress and reassign backlog priorities. And so what that call looks like is we start off by going over any backlog items that have been completed over the past week. And if we have completed any, we will go ahead and make sure to leave a note on there with any details we have on that, and then go ahead and mark it as done or fixed. Then we will go over any backlog items that we just made progress over the last week, and then we'll be sure to document that progress. Then we will see if there's been any new backlog items we've added over the past week, or maybe there's something that one of us mentioned and we hadn't created a backlog item for it. We'll go ahead and do that. And then after we've done those 3 steps, then we will go ahead and move over to prioritize. And so we'll have this list of all these items we want to accomplish, and we'll say, okay, well, for this next week, what is most important? And there's a lot of weeks where those don't change because we kind of already have in line, prioritize like what we want to do next. But then sometimes, there might be kind of an emergency come up. Maybe there's a report that users are really struggling with, and we have a backlog item of creating a training video for that. Well, we're going to go ahead and maybe bump that up and start working on it immediately. And this kind of all goes into our strategic planning. This keeps us focused on what we're trying to accomplish long term. So I think without this, we as people can kind of have a tendency to just live in the moment and like whatever is pressing the most or whatever fire comes up, we're just going to try to take care of this. And so this really gives us a long-term vision, and this allows us to make informed decisions on what's next. And it's been really key for our implementation. Next, we have training, which I think we would all agree is super important. And I would just say here that you really want to have a strategic training plan. Like there's not a one-size-fits-all training plan that's going to work for your community. I can't stand here and tell you like this is what we do and this is exactly what you should do this too, because it's going to look different. There's a lot of different methods of training. You've got videos, webinars, in person, training manuals, those kind of things, like, and just the way you go about training. I would just recommend really thinking that through, like being sure to spend the time it takes to kind of plan that out. That also might look like having specific training that targets the roles users and admins play. So for instance, for us here in Georgia, we have those COC admins. So we are going to provide specific training to them on how to set up a project in the system, because that's one of their responsibilities, is to set up projects for agencies. Well, for our users, they don't have that ability, but they are going to be requesting projects from their COC admin. So we're going to train them very differently on that, right? And that could look different for you. Maybe you don't have COC admins, but maybe you have some key agencies, larger agencies in your community where you could maybe establish agency admins and maybe have a little bit more advanced training for them so that they can then relay that training to other users they have in their agency. And then you want to listen to feedback on how training can be improved. You can do this through like doing a user survey from time to time. You can kind of keep an eye on issue tickets that are coming in. But anyways, you want to be listening for that feedback in any way you can, so you can kind of always be looking at how you can improve your training. And then you really want to provide thorough training to start with. They say it's a lot easier to raise a child correctly than it is to fix an adult. And I'd say it's a lot easier to do good training to start with than down the road having to fix all kinds of data quality problems and then retrain users because they weren't trained properly to begin with. So again, a little bit more time at the start is going to save you a lot of time down the road. And then reasonable steps in the right direction. So this is just kind of getting at, sometimes there's going to be really big projects you have, like for instance, coordinated entry might fall under this. That's not something you're going to be able to just accomplish everything at one time. So you're really going to want to kind of list out those steps, and that's going to allow you to prioritize what your core requirements are. So you're going to come up with a list of, what do we have to have, and then what are things that are just nice to have. And you might realize that some of those nice to haves we can't do in the initial build, but maybe we can do those down the road. So again, kind of just thinking about this way will help you take the steps in the right direction. And then continuous engagement. So, in life, we always hear about like communication, how that's key. And I think with HMIS, like all things, it's really important. So we try to do that through our weekly office hours calls with our COC admins. So that's an hour every week they have to ask us questions, but also ask each other questions, and we can kind of just build that community among themselves. We try to send out regular emails or in HMIS announcements to end users so that we can kind of engage them there every time they're logging in the system, or with a weekly newsletter, monthly newsletter, something like that. Like I mentioned, we do recorded trainings, so that way if it's a user that maybe can't, they can't make it to an in-person training or something like that, they can always engage with our recorded trainings. But we do encourage in-person user meetings when possible. And so like in Georgia, that would kind of fall on the local COC admins, for instance, since, we wouldn't really have the capacity to go all over the state and provide those.
So how our system admins can make all the difference. So any time that an end user submits an issue ticket and has a problem, those all come to a central location that John and myself triage, and we assign those support tasks out to the specific admins to ensure quick response from a knowledgeable admin. It really instills confidence in our COC admins when they're able to support their end users and kind of builds that trust in that relationship. From a setup data analysis perspective, anytime that an agency requests a new project, that documentation comes into a centralized email box. We have a support email box that it comes into, and then we review it first, and then send it over to the appropriate admin. That admin then sets up the project, and then we as the system admins double check that, make sure that the documentation that was done matches up with the modifications that were done in the system. Another important thing is flexibility and compromise. So while we would love for everybody to work at our pace or work the same way we do, we know that that's not true. We may be really good at teaching one way, but our end users might not learn that way. So we have to be very flexible on the way that we develop trainings. Another thing is, we would love real-time data entry for everyone, right? Client comes in, data entry happens, it goes in immediately, and everything's great. But we know in reality that's not always the case. Sometimes internet goes out, sometimes people get slammed. So one of the things that we did that was a compromise was we created paper intake forms that match up directly with the workflows that we use in Client Track. So that way we can ensure that accurate data collection happens, even if it's not done in real time. So those paper intake forms can be used. You can do the intake there, and then later go back and enter it into the system, and you've captured all the data that's required. And then the other big thing is that you really want to make sure that you're playing to your team's strengths. So in our team, we have one personality that is a developer analyst individual. They're great at kind of breaking down requirements and writing technical documentation and analyzing problems to create solutions. And then we have another person that's really great at training and support desk. So they're great at creating our training videos and corresponding with end users in a patient and helpful manner. And then I'm kind of more this communicator translator where I can talk with end users and I can be patient and I can be helpful, but at the same time I know that the language they speak does not match up with the language that our developer speaks. And even though it's all HMIS and it's all data, it's not all spoken the same. So you really want to make sure that as you look at your team, what are those strengths that you have on your team, and how can you kind of roll out tasks in a manner that play to those strengths? Because if we made our developer analyst handle issue tickets for a week, he might need a vacation the following week because that's not his strength. Let's keep everybody in the role that they're great at.
And so we kind of talked about a lot of just kind of structural things that we have, found to be helpful. And now we kind of wanted to get into some more specific tools and examples that we use. And hopefully this will be very practical things that might help you as well. And I'm a very visual person, so I actually have slides and screenshots for each of these. So we're going to kind of try to walk through these quickly, and I will kind of just highlight some points about them. So the first thing I've got here is our YouTube channel where we do host our training videos. Like I mentioned, you have to figure out for your community what works best for training. For us, we found videos works really well. And if you do go the video route, I just had a few tips. And that would be one, to start with creating a master list of videos you want to create. And for each of those, just have a short summary. This will kind of give you a game plan, making sure you're covering everything you want to. It'll give you an idea if your videos are going to be longer videos that cover a lot of things or more short. And then what I do is I do create a separate document for each video that kind of has an outline of things I want to cover. It's not so much a script, but it just has bullet points of things that I want to make sure that I'm talking about in the video. And then as feedback is received, or maybe HMIS changes are made, so let's say we put this video out there and then an HMIS change comes, or we're realizing I probably should have said this differently, then I go ahead and update that paper document that I have for that video. So then when we go to update the video later on, I've already got this document I can kind of go by. to make sure I'm covering everything there. As I mentioned, I think I mentioned this previously, like look for common issues to help drive video content. Maybe you think your initial user training video you made covered everything, but if you're still getting issue tickets a lot on a particular subject, like maybe you need to make a video just on that or kind of tweak the video that you do have. You can also use YouTube pop-up comments. I don't know if you've ever been watching a YouTube video and they have like a little box pop up midway through the video with some information. You can do that where if you've made a video and you don't really have the capacity to go reshoot it immediately or make a change to it, you could just go add a comment there to clarify some information. And if you do go the route of longer videos, I would recommend recording them in smaller sections and then just stitching them together. So I use a program to stitch our shorter videos together. So for instance, our initial user training video is like an hour and a half, but all of those videos are done individually. So if we needed to update one, I could just go in, update that video, and then splice it together. And also it allows users access to the individual videos. So like in this screenshot, you can see if you needed a video and just log in basic navigation, you could go straight to that. You're not having to go to this, hour and a half video. And then just another tip, if you do have a video library, we use links to the videos in our issue ticket responses. So if we get an issue ticket in and we think to ourselves, oh man, we made a video that covers this, we go ahead and we'll say, hey, we made a video, here's a link to it. And we found that kind of builds faith in your training materials you put out, and users realize, oh, maybe I should pay attention to these videos they're creating. And then also, I think they get a better understanding of the issue they're facing instead of just getting a quick fix of, click here, this will make your problem go away. If they're able to go watch a short video on it, hopefully they're getting a better understanding of that actual situation. And so going forward, they'll, be more knowledgeable on how the system works. Next, we have our online project and grant setup form. So initially in Georgia, we had this PDF form we would send to agencies when they needed say a new project to be set up in HMIS. And we found out we got a lot of these forms filled out improperly. Maybe they didn't fill out all the fields, or maybe they requested an emergency shelter / transitional housing project to be set up, which isn't really a thing. And so I found this really cool website called Cognito Forms, and it allows you to create kind of workflows, kind of like SurveyMonkey, where you can, set up things with conditional logic to gather information. And so these are just some screenshots, for instance, of the process that a user would go through to request a project or grant to be set up. And so I built these where, if you're selecting a particular project type, it's only going to give you grant options that would go along with that. If you are requesting a housing project to be set up, it's going to mandate that you go ahead and give us your housing inventory. And so this just makes sure that every project or agency that's set up in the system, we have all the information that we need to start with. Then, like Josh mentioned, kind of an unnecessary evil, printable intake forms. I ended up just making these in Publisher. I do think there's a good argument, though, that making these available to everyone is not a bad thing, because you never know when internet's going to go out, computer's going to crash, what have you. And so this just allows all of our users to always be able to collect compliant data. Also is great for like street outreach workers. If maybe they don't have the technology to do intakes, there on the street. If they've got these, then they can go ahead and handle that anyways.
So one of the things we talk about was continuous engagement. And in our model with so many moving parts, you have to communicate regularly with everyone. So the tool that we've used for that is Slack. It's a great messaging tool, and we actually created 2 Slack accounts. So one is the Ecovia DCA one here, where John, Eric, and I can communicate between the HMIS lead and our system admins. It also has threaded ability. So like you can see we create different channels. One is our weekly COC admin meeting channel, where we kind of document all of the things that we want to talk about each week, and we do that as a thread. So that way we can organize our comments, and we can just kind of keep general notes on what topics we want to cover in that weekly meeting. Additionally, we've got one with our COC admins, and that's between myself and the 16 people throughout the state that all do the COC admin work. And it's a way where we can communicate back and forth in real time, because we all get lots of emails, but I can quickly respond to a chat message than to sift through email and really dive in. So it's also created a great opportunity for this clearinghouse of knowledge, where admins can quickly ask each other about things, about if they're facing anything specific in their community, ask how another community handled it. If they're trying to build more buy-in from maybe some non-funded agencies. So it's really a great option for communication and information sharing. We also do a monthly newsletter at DCA. We send this out once a month to engage our end users with data. We named it Data on My Mind to kind of play on the Georgia on my mind. We're trying to do things that we can to jazz up data, because by itself, data is not very sexy to the average end user. So we try to add pictures, maybe a little bit of wit in our writing, and then keep it applicable to necessary things. And we can include video links here in our newsletter, so they can quickly go to a new training video if we created one, or release notes on maybe a new report that they might want to use. So there's lots of great opportunity here, and it continues to build confidence and respect as you continue to engage with them in regular communication.
And then another way we continue to communicate with end users is we have our HMIS set up where when you first log in, you're presented with our kind of virtual bulletin board. So we always will do announcements there, updates, things that are coming out in the system. And when we first started using this, we didn't feel like users were always paying attention to it, or maybe realizing that the content had changed. And we had a particular situation come up where we were, kind of like Josh mentioned at the beginning of this, we had a lot of fake clients being created in the system. So we had Mickey Mouses and Minnie Mouses that were enrolled in emergency shelters and things like that. So we wanted to do an announcement, and we really wanted to make sure people paid attention to it. So I created this announcement, and I don't care who you are, if you log into HMIS and you see this, you're probably going to pay attention to it and hopefully read the note. And we immediately got feedback that people, did notice this, the latest announcement. So I would just encourage you to kind of be creative when you are trying to get information to your end users. We know that a lot of caseworkers, they're so busy, they're going to log into the system and they're immediately going to, do an intake on a client or something. And so you want to have something you can kind of grab their attention. We also are using this now for, we call it a video of the month. And we take one of our videos we've already created and we throw it up here on the bulletin board. We had one video that had been created or been on YouTube for 2 or 3 months, had like maybe 2 or 3 views. We threw it on this, and within a week, we had over 120 views. So again, it's not that users are, that they just refuse to look at training materials and stuff, but sometimes we just have to find creative ways to kind of highlight them for them. Custom data quality reports. So anytime if you have the ability to create like custom reports or custom queries especially for data quality issues that are very important, we found that's really been helpful for our users. So for instance, last year when the LSA came out, because we had all the migrated data and we had some very specific migrated data issues that were affecting the LSA, we created some queries right here and menued those up for end users where they could just go in and click, and it would give them a list of any of the clients that are enrolled in projects in their agency. And then they could go in and easily correct that data. And we created a set for users that would pull it based on their agency. And then we also created a set of these for COC admins that would pull for their whole COC. So that way we kind of had 2 eyes looking at the problems, and they were able to kind of work together in getting those fixed. And then we mentioned issue tickets, how we really push issue tickets and every issue going through that ticket system. So here on the left-hand side, you can see there's a column representing continuum of care code. So that's how we know who to assign this issue ticket to, since we do have a multiple COC implementation. And then over on the right, kind of zoomed in view, 2 of those last columns are last note date and last note by. And what that is telling us is who is the last person to leave a note on this issue ticket and when did they leave that note. And so this gives COC admins a good way of looking and staying on top of their issue tickets, saying, oh, I need to go ahead and reply back to this person because I see that this user has replied back to the note I left. And it also gives us as system admins, we can easily go in and look at issue tickets that no one's left a note on and maybe remind an admin, hey, there's some tickets you might need to check on. And so we're kind of back to the list now of all of the different things I just ran through. And one thing I wanted to point out is that pretty much all of these you can use totally free of charge. And so I know no one has an unlimited budget, and sometimes we can, get into this habit of, well, we want to do some really cool stuff with HMIS. We want to be progressive, but we just don't have the budget for it. Well, all of this stuff is, like I said, you can do it free of charge. And you can kind of take these and, make them yours. So, for instance, on the online project setup form we did with Cognito Forms, you could use that for other things. We've actually started using that for other things, like when a user needs to request a user account to be set up, we have a Cognito form where they can go in, fill out all their information, and then we can set them up. And then the final bullet point there, I didn't have a slide for, general HMIS email account. That is just for issues where someone can't log into the system, but they need to get help. So that's going to be like they forgot their password, they're just having general issues logging into the system. We have that one general email there, and that's going to allow them one place they can send an email. So if we just use Josh's email, for instance, and then he's on vacation for a week, those might not be getting looked at. But because we do one email, then, that email account can be shared. And so now let's kind of talk about some results we've had. So we have definitely had a decrease in tickets submitted. And I've actually got a slide I'll show in a little bit on kind of analysis on that. But maybe even more important than that, we have a change in categories where we have fewer issue tickets on navigation and just basic issues, but now more people are just wanting to know about more advanced functionality, new form requests, and that's kind of the direction you want to see it going with issue tickets. COCs are now implementing their own CE systems, and we're kind of being able to monitor that so we make sure those don't clash with each other. We have state agencies coming to DCA for data requests, so kind of the word is out that we have a lot of data and we can access that data and run a report on that data. We are no longer worried about compliance, so now we can focus on additional functionality. We were able to expand our non-Fed data collection. We're now agencies that aren't getting federal funding, they have choices if they want to do like full intakes or partial, more streamlined intake for all of their clients. They can do that in HMIS. We have a Georgia user conference. It's kind of like a mini NHSDC. Our COC admins are going in, they're engaging at this conference, leading sessions, things like that. And we're meeting fewer times now. So we did have a meeting between the system admins in Georgia. It was 3 times a week at the beginning of this because we had so much stuff we were having to process through. Now, like we had a meeting, our weekly meeting was yesterday. It was 30 minutes going over the backlog call, and we were good to go. So just have a heads up, though, if you are making a lot of changes, you probably will have to do a lot of meetings, but just know that's not the end goal. And then issue ticket analysis, just going through this real quick, we looked at, so one of the things I look at is every week how many issue tickets come in, and then I average that out for the past 2 years, and we see there's about a 25% drop of issue tickets coming in, so I was happy with that, but I needed to look at, well, maybe we just have less users accessing the system, and that's why we got less tickets. But looking at this slide, we actually see our average number of users per week has gone way up. Now we're seeing over 100 more users per week. So taking that into consideration, I was able to look at our average number of issued tickets submitted per user in a year. And that's actually so when we consider our increase of end users, we actually had a 37% decrease of issue tickets. And I think that all just goes to show that the training we're doing, making sure that we're getting compliant project data, to set up projects initially, like is really paying off. And now users have more time to actually do their job of case management, working with clients, instead of having to struggle with an HMIS system.
So we've talked about a lot, and we know that we're not perfect. Even though we've made a lot of progress, there are still growth opportunities and solutions in progress that we're working with. And one of those is additional buy-in and cooperation with COCs. So I feel a lot of times like I supervise 16 people that don't actually work for me, and I don't sign their checks. So most of the time they buy in great, but there are times where I feel like I need to find a different way to motivate. So we're still working on that. Inter-COC communication. There's a wealth of knowledge in all of our COC admins, and we want to continue to foster and improve the way they communicate that knowledge amongst each other and can learn from one another. So we're trying to continue to develop more ways for that knowledge sharing. Strategic planning. This year we really kind of started focusing more on looking big picture and getting priorities from our governing council on where they want to see the system go next year, and then get our own priorities from an HMIS lead perspective and marry those two together. So that's something we're working on now. And then really continuing to push where all issues, whether they're handled over the phone or in the email or anywhere, then get in turn recorded back within our ticket system. So we can really do some good tracking and continue to improve upon our interaction with those end users.
Great. Thank you, Josh and John, for your great presentation. We do have a few questions that were submitted, so let's see how many we'd be able to get through in the next few minutes. Let's get started with the Q&A. And the first question that we have is, do you keep the backlog list in Client Track via suggestions, or did you customize to add these items?
So it's a great question. We actually do our backlog in our training database. So that way, all the user issue tickets we're getting in production, it's totally separate. So we can just go into training and check our backlog out there.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. And the next question is, what were the biggest data migration challenges that you had?
It's hard to say biggest because there were a lot of challenges, and really it was the way that data was stored and captured in our old system did not necessarily align with the new data standards. So one of the reasons why we had to change and the old vendor went away was because they knew they weren't going to be able to bring up the old system to be compliant with the new changing data standards and the new system performance measures. So a lot of things like client location, head of household, the way families were structured. So we had to spend a lot of time kind of fixing those data quality issues.
Okay, we do have one question. Can you tell us more or tell us about the involvement of HMIS steering committees?
Yeah, so our HMIS steering committee meets, now we meet every other month. They were meeting monthly, sometimes more frequently than that as we were setting things up. But so our steering committee is a representation from the entire state. Each COC has 2 voting members on there, and in those meetings we bring up all kinds of great things about the direction that HMIS is going, the new HUD requirements, new developments and things. So we bring all of that stuff up. They also kind of guide all of our policy. So any of our policy development goes through the steering committee, and they approve it and make recommendations for changes. So really they are kind of the governing body that drives our implementation.
Okay, so it looks like we've gotten going through our list. We've got quite a few really good questions here. And I think that is perfect timing because we are just about out of time. So we just want to thank everyone for joining us today. We will be sending out the webinar recording by Monday. And if you have additional questions regarding today's webinar, please respond to the email that you'll receive that will include the webinar recording, and we'll get back to you. Thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, guys.